Sweat stings their eyes. A digital timer bleeds red, ticking down from 40 seconds. Hardened combat veterans are frozen in pure, unadulterated panic. But the combat nurse they called a walking liability this morning, she just pulled a bobby pin from her hair and knelt beside the C4 block. Blood does not smell like pennies. Not in the real world. It smells like hot iron panic and raw dirt. Clara Davies pressed her knee hard into the pulverized concrete of the factory floor, her nitrile-gloved hand slick as she packed hemostatic gauze into a jagged tear in Private Wyatt's forearm. The young soldier was pale, his lips pulled back in a tight grimace that looked more like a snarl, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Keep your eyes on the ceiling, Wyatt," Clara said. Her voice was flat, steady. It was a stark contrast to the staccato bursts of heavy machine gun fire echoing from the adjacent courtyard. She didn't offer sweet assurances. She didn't tell him he was going to be fine. She just kept the pressure consistent, wrapping the pressure dressing with practiced mechanical efficiency. Sergeant Briggs paced near the shattered window, his boots grinding over broken glass and spent brass. He risked a glance outside, then shot a dark look back at Clara. "Wrap it up, Nightingale. We're sitting ducks in here." "I need 30 seconds, Sergeant," Clara replied, not looking up. She clamped the bandage shut and snapped her bloody gloves off, letting them drop into the dust. "We don't have 30 seconds. Corporal Hayes spat. He was crouched by the door, chewing on a matchstick, his rifle resting across his knees. He eyed Clara's bulky medical pack with open disdain. "I told Commander Field Medic was a bad call for an insertion like this. You're too slow, your gear is too heavy, we're babysitting a civilian in a war zone." Clara ignored him. She hoisted her pack onto her shoulders. The straps dug deep into her collarbones, 50 pounds of fluid splints, bandages, and trauma shears threatening to pull her backward. She was 28 years old, ran on stale coffee and 3 hours of sleep, and had seen more mutilated bodies in the emergency trauma wards of Chicago than these men had seen in their entire military careers. She knew how to stitch a man's throat together while he thrashed in a drug-induced psychosis. She knew how to restart a heart. But out here in the dust-choked ruins of an Eastern European chemical refinery, she was just a liability. The deadweight. "Move out!" Briggs barked, gesturing to the hallway. The squad advanced, forming a tight diamond. Clara stayed in the center, the safest spot, though it felt more like a cage. The refinery was a rotting leviathan of rusting pipes and crumbling cinder block. The air tasted of alkaline dust and old sulfur. Every footstep echoed. Every shadow felt like an ambush waiting to happen. Hayes took the point, his rifle sweeping the dark corridors. "Keep your boots light, Doc," he muttered over his shoulder. "Try not to trip over your own feet. If we take contact, you drop to the floor and you stay there. Do not try to be a hero. Do not get in our way." "Understood," Clara said. It was the only word she had given him all morning. There was no point in arguing. Men like Hayes didn't respect a uniform unless it came with a kill count. To them, saving a life was secondary to taking one. They reached a narrow stairwell. The metal grating groaned under their combined weight. Clara, exhausted and carrying gear meant for a mechanized unit, dragged her boots. Her foot caught the lip of a warped step. She stumbled her heavy bag, throwing her center of gravity wildly off balance. She braced for the harsh impact of the metal stairs, but a thick hand grabbed the collar of her tactical vest, yanking her upright with enough force to rattle her teeth. Hayes glared down at her, his grip still tight on her vest. "Watch your step," he hissed, his voice a low, venomous whisper. "You make a sound, you get us killed. You drop that bag, you get us killed. You are a liability, Davies. The second things go south, I am not risking my neck to drag your body out of here." Clara shoved his hand away, straightening her vest. Her chest was heaving, but her eyes were cold, locking onto his with an icy detachment she usually reserved for abusive patients back home. "Nobody asked you to, Corporal. Just point your gun and walk." Briggs cut the tension with a sharp hand signal. They had reached the sub-basement. The air down here was stagnant, heavy with the smell of moisture and decay. A massive set of reinforced steel doors loomed at the end of the corridor. The control room. Their primary objective. Inside was a localized server bank containing the telemetry data they were sent to extract. "Stack up," Briggs ordered. Clara stepped back, pressing her spine against the cold, damp concrete of the wall. She checked her sidearm, a standard-issue pistol she prayed she wouldn't have to fire, and let out a slow, measured breath. She didn't belong here. They were right about that much. But she was here anyway. And as she watched the three soldiers prepare to breach the heavy doors, a sickening feeling settled in the pit of her stomach. The silence in the hallway wasn't just quiet. It was dead. Unnaturally so. "On 3, Briggs whispered, raising his boot. 1, 2, 3. Breaching the steel doors of the refinery's subterranean control room was supposed to be the clean part of the operation. Just a simple kick sweep and clear. Briggs's boot slammed into the locking mechanism. The door gave way with a screech of tortured hinges slamming against the interior wall. The silence shattered. It wasn't a room. It was a kill box. Deafening gunfire erupted from the darkness inside, muzzle flashes illuminating the cramped space in strobe light bursts of yellow and orange. The sound was a physical force, a tidal wave of noise that punched the air out of Clara's lungs. "Contact front!" Hayes roared, diving, rolling to the side and returning fire. Concrete dusted the air as bullets chewed through the walls around them. Clara dropped to the floor, her ears ringing violently. Dust coated her throat, choking her. Ahead of her, Wyatt stepped into the doorway to lay down suppressive fire. He didn't even make it 3 feet. A heavy caliber round caught him high in the shoulder, spinning him like a broken toy. He collapsed backward, hitting the floor hard, his rifle clattering away into the dark. "Wyatt's down!" Briggs yelled over the deafening roar of automatic fire. "Pull back! Get him into the bunker! Move, move, move!" Opposite the control room was an old utility bunker, heavily reinforced and out of the direct line of sight. Briggs grabbed Wyatt by the drag handle of his plate carrier and hauled him backward, his boots sliding in a sudden slick of fresh blood. Clara crawled frantically alongside them, keeping her head low, as bullets sparked against the floor, grating where she had stood a second before. They tumbled into the utility room. Hayes was the last one in. He slammed the heavy blast door shut and threw the deadbolt, plunging them into near-total darkness. The sudden silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the muffled, rhythmic thud of rounds hitting the thick steel on the outside. "Light, give me a light," Clara demanded, her voice cutting through the dark. A flashlight beam snapped on, courtesy of Briggs. He pointed it at the floor. Wyatt was a mess. The round had shattered his clavicle and ripped through the subclavian artery. Dark arterial blood was pooling rapidly beneath him, soaking his uniform. He was already losing consciousness, his eyes rolling back. Clara didn't hesitate. She threw her heavy pack down, unzipped it, and went to work. "Hold the light steady." She barked at Briggs. All the fatigue, all the intimidation of the squad's toxic bravado vanished. This was her domain. She drove her fingers directly into the wound channel, finding the severed artery by feel, and pinched it shut. Wyatt weakly arched his back, a gurgling sound escaping his throat. "I got it! I got it!" Clara murmured, her voice dropping into a soothing clinical cadence. With her free hand, she ripped open a package of hemostatic dressing with her teeth and began packing the cavity with brutal life-saving force. Across the small room, Hayes was running his hands along the walls looking for a secondary exit. "It's a dead end," he growled. "No vents, no secondary doors. We're boxed in. Comms are jammed." Briggs said, looking away from Clara's bloody hands to check his radio. Static hissed through the channel. They knew we were coming. They funneled us right in here. Then a sound cut through the heavy breathing and the static. Beep. It was faint, electronic, high-pitched. Hayes froze. He slowly turned his flashlight away from the door and tracked it up to the ceiling, then over to the main support pillar in the center of the cramped room. The beam illuminated a nightmare. Strapped to the concrete pillar was a rectangular brick of grayish dough. Wires red, blue, and yellow spidered out from the explosive, connecting to a digital receiver and a small red LED display. The display read 0300, C4. Hayes whispered the color draining entirely from his weathered face. It's a command-detonated trap with a fail-safe timer. 3 minutes. Briggs stared at the brick, the heavy flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. The hardened sergeant, the man who had ordered Clara around all morning with absolute authority, looked utterly lost. Wyatt, Briggs stammered, looking down at the bleeding private. Wyatt is our demo guy. He's the only one who knows EOD. Clara tied off the pressure bandage on Wyatt's shoulder. She checked his pulse. Weak, thready, but there. He was stabilized but completely incapacitated. Out of the fight. Wake him up, Haas demanded, stepping toward them. Panic was bleeding into his voice, stripping away his tough guy facade. Give him an EpiPen, slap him awake. We need him to cut the wires. He's in hypovolemic shock, Clara said, wiping a streak of blood off her forehead with the back of her wrist. If I hit him with epinephrine right now, his heart will give out. He can't help you. Then we're dead, Hayes said, backing away until his spine hit the blast door. He stared at the timer. 0230. 3 pounds of C4 in a sealed concrete box. The concussive wave alone will turn our organs into jelly before the fire even touches us. Briggs stepped toward the pillar, his hands hovering over the wires. Maybe we just pull the detonator out of the putty. Just yank it. Do it and we blow. Hayes snapped. It's got a tamper loop. Look at the secondary wire looping back to the battery. You break the circuit the failsafe triggers. The 2 seasoned veterans stood there paralyzed by a threat they couldn't shoot. The digital timer mocked them. 1:45. They were soldiers. Destroyers. But destruction was already here, and they had no idea how to stop it. Clara stood up. Her knees ached, and her hands were painted crimson. She looked at the 2 men, their faces slick with terrified sweat, and then she looked at the bomb. She walked past Briggs and stepped directly in front of the pillar. Hey! Hayes yelled, his voice cracking. Get back! What are you doing? Don't touch it! Clara reached up to the back of her head. She found the messy bun that had held her hair out of her face for the last 14 hours. Her fingers found the stiff metal bobby pin holding it all together. She pulled it out. Her hair cascaded down around her shoulders. Hold the light on the panel, Clara ordered. Briggs didn't move. He was staring at her as if she had lost her mind. I said, hold the damn light! Clara snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. It was a tone of pure authority forged in the chaos of a dozen code blues. Briggs mechanically raised the flashlight. Clara bent the bobby pin open, sliding the metal ends between her bloody fingers, and leaned in towards the explosive. Sweat stung Briggs's eyes, blurring his vision, but he didn't dare blink. He held the flashlight with both hands, the heavy metal casing vibrating against his knuckles. The beam illuminated the circuit board strapped to the explosives. It was a crude, ugly piece of engineering. Soldered joints looked like metallic scabs. Wires crossed over each other like a tangled vascular system. Clara studied the board. Her breathing was slow, measured through her nose. In the chaotic emergency rooms of Chicago, she had learned to tune out the screaming monitors, the crying families, the frantic orders of attending physicians. Panic was a contagious disease. Focus was the only cure. She treated the bomb like a ruptured spleen. Find the source. isolate, clamp. "You're going to kill us!" Hayes rasped from the back of the room. He was pressed so hard against the steel door, it looked like he was trying to phase through it. "You don't know what you're doing. You're a Nurse Davies, not EOD." "Quiet," Briggs growled. His voice was gravel. He kept the light steady. 01:15. Clara read the timer aloud. The red numbers glared back at her. "Hayes, if you speak again, I will walk over there and sedate you. I need absolute silence." Hayes snapped his mouth shut, his chest heaving. Clara wiped her bloody fingers on her tactical pants. She needed grip. The blood was starting to dry, turning tacky. She looked at the bobby pin. The two prongs were thin, coated in a cheap black enamel that was chipping away at the bend. It wasn't insulated. It wasn't a precision tool, but it was conductive, and it was narrow enough to fit between the tight plastic housing of the main relay switch. "What's the play, Doc?" Briggs whispered. "The red wire is the primary firing line." Clara said, her eyes tracing the copper path on the green board. "It runs straight to the blasting cap buried in the putty. But there's a secondary circuit. See the blue wire? It loops through a spring-loaded relay. If I cut the red wire, the voltage drops, the relay snaps shut, and the blue wire completes the circuit. Boom." Briggs swallowed hard. "So we can't cut it." "Not until the relay is blocked," she said. She moved her hands closer to the bomb. The timer ticked. 00:58. Her fingers didn't shake. They were the same fingers that had meticulously stitched micro-tears in pediatric arteries. They were built for fractions of a millimeter. She slid the bent bobby pin toward the small black plastic box housing the relay. The gap between the contact points was no thicker than a fingernail. "Hold the light a little higher," she murmured. Briggs adjusted his grip. 00:45. Clara wedged the tip of the hairpin into the tiny gap. She felt the slight resistance of the spring mechanism inside. She pushed, wedging the metal pin deep enough to jam the small armature plate. If she pushed too hard, she might bridge the contacts herself and trigger the blast. If she pushed too gently, the pin would slip out the moment the primary wire was severed. It was a matter of tactile feedback. It was exactly like finding the exact depth to insert a chest tube without puncturing a lung. She felt a soft click. The pin was wedged tight. "Okay," Clara breathed. "Relay is pinned." 00:30. "Now what?" Briggs asked. The flashlight beam was visibly shaking now. The hardened veteran was reaching his breaking point. "Now I have to cut the primary wire," she said. "With what?" Hayes blurted, unable to contain his terror. "You don't have clippers." Clara reached into her vest pouch and pulled out her trauma shears. They were heavy angled scissors designed to cut through thick Kevlar denim and leather boots in a single motion. They were not designed for delicate electronics. 00:20. She opened the jaws of the shears. They were coated in Wyatt's drying blood. She aligned the thick serrated blades with the red wire. It was tucked tightly against the C4 block, leaving almost no room to maneuver. "Davies." Briggs said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "If this doesn't work, it's been an honor." Clara didn't look at him. She didn't offer a dramatic final word. She kept her eyes locked on the wire. 00:12. She slid the lower blade under the red wire. The metal of the shears scraped softly against the explosive dough. She held her breath. 00:08. "Don't move the light," she commanded. 00:05. Clara squeezed the handles of the trauma shears. The serrated blades bit into the copper wire. It was surprisingly tough. She applied more pressure, her knuckles turning white. 00:03. Snap. The red wire gave way. The severed ends sprang apart. Instantly, the small relay inside the plastic box tried to snap shut to complete the fail-safe circuit. It hit the bobby pin with a microscopic click. The pin held. The circuit remained open. On the LED display, the timer froze. 0002. The room descended into a suffocating, heavy silence. The only sound was the jagged, desperate breathing of the 3 conscious people inside the bunker. The gunfire outside had momentarily ceased, leaving a haunting stillness in its wake. Clara slowly backed away from the pillar. She let the trauma shears dangle loosely from her hand. Her legs suddenly felt like lead, the adrenaline crashing through her system in a tidal wave of exhaustion. She leaned against the cold concrete wall and closed her eyes. Briggs lowered the flashlight. He stared at the frozen red numbers, his chest rising and falling in massive, shuddering heaves. He looked at the bomb, then at the hairpin jammed into the circuit, and finally at Clara. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Hayes slid down the steel blast door until he was sitting on the floor, his head between his knees, letting out a long, shaky groan. The man who had called her a deadweight an hour ago was now weeping silently into his tactical gloves. Gunfire erupted again, shattering the temporary peace. Heavy rounds hammered against the steel blast door, vibrating through the floorboards. The enemy hadn't left. They were just repositioning, waiting for the timer to do their dirty work. Now that the explosion hadn't come, they were trying to force their way inside. "They're shooting at the hinges," Briggs said, snapping out of his shock. The soldier was back. The fear was packed away, replaced by cold, tactical calculation. He turned to Clara, his expression completely altered. The sneer of superiority was gone. "Davies, check Wyatt. Can he move?" Clara pushed off the wall. Her hands were shaking now, a delayed reaction to the brush with vaporization, but she forced them still as she knelt beside the young private. Wyatt was pale, his skin clammy and cold. The pool of blood beneath him had ceased expanding, meaning her packing job had held, but his pulse was a fluttering, fragile thing. "He's stabilized for now, but he's lost massive volume," Clara reported, checking his pupils. "He needs a transfusion and a surgical theater. If we try to make him walk, his pressure will bottom out and his heart will stop. He has to be carried." "I'll carry him," Hayes said. Clara looked up. The corporal was on his feet. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face streaked with dust and sweat, but his jaw was set. He avoided Clara's gaze, looking instead at the wounded man on the floor. He slung his rifle over his back and stepped over to Wyatt. "I got him, Doc. I won't drop him." It was the first time he had called her Doc without it sounding like an insult. "We can't go back through that door," Briggs said, running his hands along the rear wall of the utility bunker. He tapped the cinder blocks with the butt of his rifle. "Solid masonry. But look here." He pointed his light at a section near the floor where the mortar was crumbling, revealing old rusted ventilation grating behind it. "It backs up to the old drainage tunnels. If we can punch a hole through this, we bypass the kill box entirely. We don't have breaching charges." Hayes grunted, hoisting Wyatt up by the tactical harness and draping the unconscious soldier over his shoulders in a fireman's carry. The strain showed instantly on his face, but he planted his boots and held the weight. Briggs turned slowly, his eyes locking onto the center pillar. "Yes, we do." Clara followed his gaze. The 3 pounds of C4. "You've got to be kidding me," she said. "We need a small piece," Briggs said, approaching the bomb with a newfound terrifying reverence. "Just enough to blow the masonry, not enough to bring the ceiling down on our heads." He looked at Clara. "Davies, can you pull the detonator?" An hour ago, he would have pushed her out of the way to do it himself. Now he was asking for her permission. He was deferring to her hands. Clara didn't hesitate. She walked back to the explosive. The bobby pin was still holding the relay open. She gripped the blasting cap, a small silver cylinder embedded in the putty, and pulled it out with a slow, agonizingly smooth motion. She handed the live cap to Briggs. He took it, delicately peeling off a golf ball-sized chunk of the C4 dough. "Take cover," Briggs ordered, pressing the small charge against the crumbling mortar. He wedged the blasting cap into the piece and wired it directly to a spare battery pack from his radio. Clara grabbed her massive medical bag. It felt heavier than before, the straps digging viciously into her bruised shoulders, but she didn't complain. She moved to the far corner, crouching low behind an old steel workbench. Hayes knelt beside her, Wyatt's limp body shielding them both. Fire in the hole," Briggs muttered, touching the wires together. The blast was a sharp, concussive slap that knocked the breath out of them. Dust instantly filled the cramped room, thick and choking. Small pieces of concrete rained down, clattering against the metal bench. Clara coughed, waving her hands in front of her face as the smoke cleared. Where the solid wall had been, there was now a ragged, jagged hole, revealing the dark, echoing expanse of a concrete drainage pipe. Fresh, cool air rushed in, sweeping the cordite away. "Move out," Briggs commanded, kicking away loose bricks. Hayes went first, hauling Wyatt through the opening with a grunt of exertion. The private groaned softly, but remained unconscious. Clara followed, squeezing her bulky medical pack through the jagged masonry. The tunnel was damp and smelled of ancient rainwater, but it was safe. It was a way out. Briggs came through last. He turned and aimed his rifle back through the hole, waiting for the blast door to finally give way. Seconds later, it did. Shouting voices echoed in the room they had just vacated. Briggs fired 3 quick bursts into the dark, buying them the head start they needed, then turned and jogged down the tunnel to catch up. They walked for 20 minutes in silence, navigating the winding subterranean maze. The gunfire faded into a distant, muffled popping until it vanished entirely. The only sound was the splash of their boots in shallow puddles and Wyatt's ragged breathing. Finally, a pale square of moonlight appeared ahead. The tunnel exit. They emerged into the cool night air, scrambling up an embankment into a dense grove of trees, a mile away from the refinery complex. Briggs tapped his radio, securing a clear signal. "Actual, this is Bravo 2. We are at the secondary extraction point. 1 priority casualty, requesting immediate medevac." The radio crackled. "Copy Bravo 2. Bird is inbound. ETA 5 minutes. Briggs let out a long exhale and sank to his knees in the wet grass. Hayes carefully laid Wyatt down on the ground. The corporal was exhausted, his chest heaving, his uniform soaked in his squad mate's blood. He stepped back and looked at Clara. She was already kneeling beside Wyatt, checking his dressing, checking his pulse, her face a mask of professional stoicism. Hayes reached into his pocket. He pulled out a dirty, bent piece of black metal. He had snagged it off the bomb before the breach. He walked over and held it out to her. Clara looked up, her hand still resting on Wyatt's chest. She looked at the bobby pin in his palm. "Your hair's a mess, Doc," Hayes said softly. Clara took the pin. She didn't smile, but the tension in her jaw finally released. She reached back, gathered her tangled hair, and pinned it up. "Let's get him home," she said. "Don't underestimate the quiet ones in the room." If this story had you holding your breath, hit that like button and subscribe for more raw, adrenaline-fueled narratives. Drop a comment below. Did you see that hairpin save coming? Or did you think they were done for? Share this video with a friend who loves high-stakes tension and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what Squad Bravo 2 runs into next. Stay gritty and stay tuned.